as promised, we're going to look at a left-wing progressive author. I believe it is important to have a heterodox approach to learning and make sure, as John Stuart Mill said, you really need to listen to all sides. You need to listen to the opposite of your beliefs to either strengthen your own beliefs or to find out what you believe is wrong. So Howard Zinn, it doesn't get much more left-wing than this. If we were to put Howard Zinn on the political spectrum, he's pretty far over there on the left-wing, progressive, socialist, communist. I like this book. You shouldn't take this as the Bible of history. You need to read American history from all points of view, but it's definitely enlightening. And so if you are, everyone should listen to this. Let's just roll with it. So the story that we're going to focus on here is during the Great Depression, and it is in Appalachia. So Aunt Molly Jackson, a traveling midwife, has to feed some starving kids during the Depression. She goes to the store and she goes to purchase some flour. When it comes time to pay, she doesn't have any money. It's the Great Depression. She says, "I'll pay you later." The clerk obviously says, "That's not how it works. We need money. It's the Great Depression." So she pulls a gun on him and proceeds to steal the flour. "Martin, if you try to take this grub away from me, God knows that if they electrocute me tomorrow, I'll shoot you 6 times in a minute." And she steals the flour, takes it home. I walked out. I got home, and these 7 children was so hungry that they was grabbing the raw dough off of their mother's hands and cramming it into their mouths and swallowing it whole. It's the Great Depression. People are starving. People have to do what they have to do to survive. Now, in this moment, this is where cognitive dissonance is taking over for not just the left, but also for the right, where you have this belief, be it pro-gun or anti-gun, you have this belief, and then the facts are presented as such that now you start to question that thing that you've believed, and your part of your brain's wrestling, no, I believe this, but the facts are telling you otherwise. The left believes guns are bad, but if it weren't for the gun, those children starve to death. What do? You're wrestling with that fact. I don't like guns, but those are the facts in that situation. The right, there's nothing wrong with guns, but that's theft. How do you wrestle with that? We're not going to mess with really the property rights, the theft angle here. Let's focus mainly on the left's belief that guns are bad. And in this story, it's hard to come away with the idea that guns are bad. If it's not for the gun, Aunt Molly Jackson doesn't feed the children. They starve. And yes, they were starving. They were eating raw flour. So while your brain is trying to figure, but I found this on there. It's pretty good. Simple, but wrong. Often we have to understand that the world's complex. There's a lot of different issues. It is not easy to figure these things out. So we look at this gun issue, and often we hear the right argue, well, guns are important because of self-defense. That doesn't resonate. That doesn't really cause cognitive dissonance because most people on the left that are anti-gun, that's their belief, can find reasons why, well, you can defend yourself in this manner. You can learn karate, or you can use a knife or mace. So they're going to find other ways to explain and still be able to hold into that belief. You also hear the argument of, oh, well, I need a gun against the oppression of a tyrannical government. You know, the Thomas Jefferson idea of, I'm going to need this government in case a tyrannical government ever tries to take my property away or tries to ruin my life. For most people, that doesn't cause cognitive dissonance either because that's just too far-fetched. I mean, I know people are like, well, Ruby Ridge and Waco, but still that's too far-fetched for at least most Americans on the left side of the political spectrum. This idea that you're going to get into a shootout or you're going to shoot your way out of trouble with the government, that's just not a fact that is going to cause cognitive dissonance. So for the most part, in trying to persuade someone to be pro-gun or just to not be anti-gun, to be agnostic about the whole issue, the self-defense persuasion doesn't really work very well. It doesn't cause cognitive dissonance. The tyrannical government doesn't really cause cognitive dissonance. But the tyrannical government is actually close. And that's what Howard Zinn does here in Persuade, which is crazy. The leftist, the progressive, Howard Zinn has written an amazing, maybe the most persuasive point for gun rights ever. No one would have ever thought that. And I don't think anyone else realized that. But if you dig into the book, you're going to find that passage. It's crazy. It's been there all along. The answer for the gun activists wasn't the ideas of the right. It wasn't the idea of the conservatives or the conservative thinkers. It was the leftists all along that had the most persuasive argument for guns rights. That's connected to this tyrannical government. It's not necessarily that you are going to get in a government shootout. You need a gun so you can win in a shootout against the government. That's not it. It's that a tyrannical government can pass bad laws and bad policies. And those bad laws and policies turn the country into a disaster, into a nightmare. They disintegrate the nation. That's what you have during the Great Depression. Bad government policies, the economy collapses, the institutions collapse, and you're living in a nightmare scenario. And if you are living in a dystopia, or if you are living in a nightmare, or if the world around you is collapsing, well, of course you need a gun. That's where the cognitive dissonance happens. The left, for the most part, has this belief that guns are bad. We don't need guns. That is their belief. And the facts of self-defense, it doesn't work. The tyrannical government that you're in a shootout with, it doesn't work. But then when you present the fact of what if a tyrannical government runs the country into the ground and it's a disaster, do you need a gun then? Now the cognitive dissonance takes over. This is the point that Zinn unfortunately makes for Howard Zinn and the left, but it's clear that when the country is falling apart, when we are in the darkest of times, that is when you're going to need to be able to arm yourself for whatever is necessary. That's where the facts start to mount up. The cognitive dissonance comes in and people start to be persuaded towards, yes, this belief that guns are evil and guns are bad. Well, maybe they're dangerous, but maybe people should have the right to have those guns. That's what Zinn is saying here. The Great Depression, the worst of times possible. Yeah, it makes sense that people were going to need to arm themselves. And what have we seen lately? The increase in gun sales under a very similar situation. Bad government policy creates a bad environment in our nation, which leads to people saying, well, maybe I do need to arm myself. Who would have thought that it was the leftist progressive and Howard Zinn that would make maybe possibly the most persuasive argument for the Second Amendment? It's right there in the book. And it's hard to, that cognitive dissonance that's happening in your mind, it's okay. These are the facts. This is a situation, if you want to persuade someone to be, I don't care, I'm agnostic about the issue. I don't care what I believe or know what I believe, but I know that when you look at this story and you look at the facts, it seems to me that yes, there is a reasonable concern when the government can't do its job that people should have the right to own arms, not for self-defense necessarily, not because you're in a shootout with the government, but because during these uncertain times, people need to have these specific measures. Those kids would have starved to death at the least. Could have been much worse. Who knows what would happen? So there it is, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. There's tons of great anecdotes in this book. I don't know about reading into the giant narrative of America's awful and evil, but from a first-person accounts, piecing them together in these little anecdotes, it's a really amazing book. Now, you need to make sure you're also reading other American history, too, to get a bigger grand scale scheme understanding of things. And unfortunately, a lot of schools, this book is really just the only thing they teach, which is scary and dangerous. But I guess at least it is slightly a start. It's probably better than some of the textbooks. But there it is. There's your Howard Zinn defending the Second Amendment. Didn't think that was ever going to be a video, but it is. Enjoy.